Hey, this is Dale Roleplay Cafe. This is going to be a reflections and impressions video um, of the Space Age Man, the first trial, beta trial. We played it very vanilla, stripped down, with very minimal uh, rule set to keep guidance. Now, it was a very, very good session to me, not because it ran perfectly or the game was, it was very informative toward what we was trying to achieve, which was understanding what needs to be added. We went from a stripped down position to see if there was things instead of a reverse, trying to see what we need to remove, move basically everything. What do we need to add? So flip that and see myself from the perspective of being the presenter, and a lot of what Jason reflects, if you see his reflection video, reflects on. I could sense and understand because when you're having a conversation and a mutual world building, now that didn't really play out like it normally does in our Dark Age of Man scenarios or whatever, like, where you can just pass that, like I said, hot potato, pass the information back and forth. Um, it didn't really occur like we wanted it to, right? Aside from the Discord breakups, or maybe me kind of extrapolating about what he was witnessing, and because my gears were turning, I was trying to lay out and literally build the setting in play, and um, as well as extrapolating what I had written down on the random seeds, which I thought actually, from my perspective as a presenter, the random seeds worked really well in informing me what was going on. Aside from the little, adjustments of me trying to express the world and the sciences, and maybe doing an overly uh, encumbering monologue of that a little bit, right? In general, like I told Jason, it needs to come down to about three things that you say. This pertinent, the three mage thing, and then to me, the player character can just make safe assumptions in what he adds to the narrative and what he sees and views. And then, like Jason said, you do that yes and or yes but. If there's an exception that has to be made, you add to it, and that's how the communication goes and builds. Because ultimately, those small minute details don't really matter. I think that uh, but once that just more so show that the setting needs to be defined beforehand. And aside from the setting, just like in Dark Age Man, you can put the setting there, and you kind of know. You feel it. The tech, everything is not so out of bounds um, that anybody sitting at the table couldn't kind of feed into the narrative from their position in game to add to it and roll. Uh, the uncertainty of being extraterrestrial, living in or acting as a character in a different environment, and especially more so less science fantasy, but more hard science, industrial tech, which we landed on because, for one, it's very it's very familiar. Okay, not only from what like a comm, or there could be weaponry or maybe a jetpack or a moon buggy or anything. It isn't so far field. It is like almost fantastical alien stuff that's relegated to maybe something you might discover, but it's not in everyday use in the tech, which is, to me, appropriate, right? So, I mean, other than the little things of how society, or at least the far-flung outpost, uh, is structured, you know, uh, which is another thing that it helped me kind of define. I knew when I was working in a situation, or laying out what things were like, um, where Jason's character was. It smacked of just being an outpost, like in the Thing, or like this isolated area, which for all intent and purposes it was. I tried to bolster it a little bit and make it and add the aspect of the Russians were there on the moon too, right? They had a base as well that could add another layer of potential conflict, which is good. Um, you could uncover something there that you know could add to the potential conflict or situations or things your character has to contend with. That's there, but to me, if you're going to be having a game in space, you relate back to the Earth, and tangentially as far as like the other places that you're at is the moon or the asteroid belt or Mars, but there needs to be more of a thriving uh, uh, social construction amongst this place. So there needs to be more of a fuller realized uh, commerce and just society in general beyond Earth. All right, that way your player characters can interface with a lot more than just being isolated in an outpost somewhere. Even though that's all fun and everything, they still need a home base to go back to or whatever. This thriving that has more of the things that people are used to interacting with, right? This also expands the possibility of profession somewhat or how you interact. This more akin to how what we're used to interacting with on Earth that can let player characters uh, expound upon things in the narrative and just be there, right? So instead of putting up walls to what the player characters can make safe assumptions about and rebound off of each other with the presenter, and as well as each other, they need to have uh, more of a well to draw from. So an expanded uh, society space is more profitable, I think, for the narrative to take root and hold and be more expansive than just isolated. So that, for one, is what I came to understand during the game, right? Where beforehand it wasn't readily known. So, point in case that needs to grow. Like I said, the setting needs to be there. Foundational sciences need to be kind of at least outlined and agreed upon. That's not too hard uh, to establish. Now that I find like the deepening of the character sheet to inform the player of how things work is probably to some degree correct. I think it works hand in hand with the understanding uh, the science and the technology. You could still there's a harmony there needs to be a tweaking of the level of detail on the character sheet as well as the understood science, the setting itself, and how what professions are there or what you see what I'm saying. Even though, like I said, more of a expanded society in space would increase the level of professions. So that balancing of that scale is just something that we have to do in game. Um, I think that's really what we tested the game and solved those limitations that need to be addressed to be able to uh, fix those to allow more in character as character play on a Dark Age of Man level, that we want to get to. This is the whole deal. So I thought the session was very informative, in spite of all the Discord breakdowns or the fact that there was times where I know there was stepping on toes because it's a dance whenever you do this narrative back and forth. Not only in we toy with the idea of like the macro and micro narrative movements. What really needs to be. It's like a movie. You pan out, or you need to come in and focus on a certain scene, so it can be paced and slowed down. And there's a back and forth. There's a yielding back and forth in the narrative from the presenter to the player to other players, to what is transpiring, and going from scene to scene almost, right? So, and there has to be like a subtle, quiet yielding and understanding of the when you're transpiring to that. Because even as a presenter, you're in large part a character. You're representing the world. You know what I mean? If everybody isn't in sync to whenever that transition happens, one person might be going a little slower, and the other wants to accelerate and get to the next thing. That's almost like what's a dance? You have to realize there has to be certain earmarks. I think that we're going here now, or this is where we're moving. And a lot of times it's seamless. Other times, it's a practiced art to where you kind of fold into and you understand each other across the table. And it gets easier as you go. Easier in general, except when we're trying to design a game in the moment and, setting in the moment and realizing the bounds of science and how much needs to be described. So that to me, the game didn't. It was encouraging. The missteps were informative. I don't think that they're roadblocks or they're permanent hindrances on what we can do. I feel encouraged about proceeding further into the game and but I do realize that it has natural barriers to just the automatic awareness and intuitive ability of player characters to be able to insert the narrative, right? Especially if there's a question. And it's almost like playing with your hand tied if there isn't, narratively, as a player character, there isn't that. To be honest, it was some of that breakdown, from my side. It wasn't liberated like we usually are. Like Jason said, maybe we're rusty a little bit. Yeah. Maybe the Discord broke up. Yeah. All that plays in. Maybe the setting, like I said, in the science, there wasn't a certainty of assurance that we knew immediately what the setting was, that we could just be liberated to just play a character. So it was more of an inquiry or inquisition in what we were looking at. But I think it will become easier, and I more so readily know myself, and I think Jason does too, what needs to be done to fix those things to make it more friendly, more liberating for the in-character character play. So I don't think I do see the natural barriers to achieving that, but I don't think it's impossible. In fact, seeing that is rising to the challenge. But I definitely know. I think it's going to be very interesting. I mean, I could feel it from presenter when I was that it wasn't like we usually play, right? The automatic familiarity. But I do think we can get there, and I think, and I can see from his end how it was inspiring him just to run with it. Now it's going to be very interesting when he runs it. Like I say, he's not the sci-fi guy or whatever like that. So maybe from my perspective as a player character, I can kind of pick up a more so run, but I don't know. I don't know. Once I know, it doesn't need to be that any kind of a story you read isn't about the science. That's just the backdrop. It's about the human condition. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to get to. It doesn't need the science doesn't need to impede or stand in the way of. There's a moment when we were playing when he said he wanted to get out to the car, yet, or the moon buggy and traverse across there, kind of summarizing it, speeding to that point, but he had to meet up with somebody, right? And this is a faux pas on mine because I had the pacing done to where, and I felt I should have explained that the guy was going to meet him there. So I retconned that a little bit, pulled it back, which was a stepping on toes, right? So you should go with it. And when your mind's abuzz about keeping things on track and on target, and opportunities for more rich role play, which I felt like I had squandered or not given the opportunity, and almost that retcon was to bring it back that this is an opportunity to get to know who you're riding with, and it was a missed opportunity because it could have been done in the car on the way there. You know what I mean? And when you're doing this stuff live and in action, it flows. So I mean, it can flows or it can flub or whatever. And that was interesting to me, and it was a little bit based on highlighting how the transfer from airlock to going outside to where you both have to suit each other up. So in a way, I was dual tasking in trying to uh, showcase how that transition from space habitat to that. Not that Jason hadn't seen 1,000 movies where you see the airlock, but more so, I needed to know how much of the science in the hard science is applicable to the narrative. So that's what I was going through as a presenter in my mind to say, like, is this important? Isn't important? And to what degree? Ultimately, it isn't. But, it was an exploration, as I say, into what was more weighty, how much was the science needed to be highlighted as opposed to regressing in the back. So to me, the session was really, really informative. I could see the restraints put on the player character whenever that became more of an issue. Not knowing the setting or being familiar with from the onset, having a loose understanding of the tech, which I don't think was too much hampering, but it was in the fact that I was trying to at least understand it myself and see how the mechanisms worked. Because that front loaded led into that leaving led into the fact of them going to the other Russian base. Which how do you access it? What do you do? What's the parameters of that? So that was a diversionary thing that me as a presenter went into to try to say that how much needs to be addressed of this, because I'm filling it out. It's like a blind man in the dark when trying to fill things out, right? But it was informing me of just how this will be. But I'm no fool. I know when Dark Age Man hits the ground running, people's going to be as stylized or as grittily real to the time period as their table wants it to be. So there has to be a certain unanimity of cohesion at the table for what's understood. You know what I mean? Like I said earlier, whenever somebody's saying something, when you get a group of people and the player character is adding to the narrative, like Jason said, yes and yes, but it's setting the reality of what's there. It's just when it hits that reality of what is there and to what level of like in Dark Age of Man, like heraldry wasn't there, but if somebody instigates it, it's fine. It isn't breaking. My question was how does that and will it potentially break the science? How much of science is important on this to roll over? How much needs to be stressed? But I think that ultimately can just be reduced to this is, if I would say in a nutshell, you're in a tin can in space. Vacuum is real. But I'm saying things that's very but it can be narrowed down to just that. You know what I mean? And locking and docking is important. So, there's key stress points of breaks that could totally devastate your habitat. And to have that, like I said, that claustrophobic feel that you do feel there is important for me to feel that threat level, which aligns itself with the mechanic of the threat mechanic, right? That something could go awry. If you in your profession screws up in some kind of a way that can impair that, it's gonna go to red alert, klaxons going on, and that's a lot of what the feel should be, I think. So very informative. I'm really eager to have Jason lead it. I know he's more experienced GM than I. Most of my time is spent playing, right? But from him, if he can exercise from the GM perspective, and I can play in response to him, because everybody on the table's a little bit of a GM, and in our system, what we do is throw it out there, but it needs to come alive. It feels The more we do this, the more secured it can get. I'll lay out the setting, the parameters, a basic understanding of foundational uh, hard sci-fi, even though we're dealing with the pseudo realm that needs to be kind of adhered to. And none of this talk, it doesn't need to be, I'm not talking about Jason and I's game specifically, because if I see that game specifically, it is a restriction of the player character being able to be allowed to play in character as character and add to the narrative light that needs to be sufficiently to be a game to where everybody's enjoying it. Otherwise, it's just some kind of monologue that the presenter's giving out, info dump, like I said to Jason, and then he's just responding in kind with the information he just received is about what he can and can't do. As I'm sitting there wrestling with what, how much science needs to be implemented into the thing and how much isn't. So that was what a lot of what I was trying to balance myself. Just a basic foundation level, basic understood science of industrial sci-fi, adhered to space habitats, moon bases, outpost on even, an asteroid, larger central space base that could be almost like the main Deep Space Nine or habitat, or some kind of a central city that everybody goes back and gets resupplied with and leaves off. That's important. It, based at a certain area, freighters going back and forth, more of a robust setting in our solar system. So would be better, and that way you feel like you're a cog in a larger machine instead of like set out there on a far flung outpost. It would be better to serve the game. So that's what it helped me get to, and then we kind of design and go from there. And everybody knows those parameters, and everybody can be fully realized characters in the setting, and the science fiction wouldn't break it because it's all about the story, right? Outlining it, getting there is what's important. Anyway, had a good guy. I can't wait till Jason runs me in it, and then we do that, and he can see from that perspective too. And I think it would be more true to what I'm ultimately getting at here. The science isn't that important, and that was a realization that I had in real time in that AP for me. So I feel more secure that I can go on and design this going to better suit people to be more flexible in how they perceive the world, and they can perceive it as everybody does from their character's point of view, and can see things and have that liberty to see things. And then the person can go yes and a yes, but there's a freedom in it where I was having trouble coming to a point to where I could see that allowing it, just from the science from the onset of when I set up the game. But now I do. So ironically, that's what that session provided for me, But that's going to be perfect when Jason takes over, and then I can just run with it and establish, and we hot potato off each other and keep the narrative rolling. Bingo. So anyway, I'll get off here. Y'all have a great day. Can't wait for the next game, bud.